Okay, welcome to this session on the district's Advancing Racial Equity or DARE tool. We will get started in a few moments. All right, again, welcome for those of you who are joining us for a session on the district's Advancing Racial Equity tool. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on the district's Advancing Racial Equity or DARE tool, a research-based and practice-tested tool for leading progress toward racial equity. We're going to start with a poll, which we'll bring up in just a few seconds once we've got everyone in. Please take a moment to answer the questions in the poll. For those of you just joining us, we've got a poll that's up for this session on the district's Advancing Racial Equity tool. When you've got a moment, please go ahead and answer the 2 questions in the poll, and then we'll share the results and get started on the session. All right, I see quite a few people are participating in the poll, so we'll give it a few more seconds to give everyone a chance to answer, and then we'll get started. All right, so I think you can all see the results of the poll. It looks like almost 80% of you somewhat agree that your school system has a systematic approach to ensuring racially equitable opportunities and outcomes for students. Another 20% somewhat disagree. So it sounds like most of your responses are kind of in that middle place. Maybe you have a few processes, but not necessarily a systematic approach. And now I'm looking at what you're looking forward to learning, mostly the features of the district's Advancing Racial Equity tool. So we will definitely be spending some time on that. We will be spending time looking through the features of the tool, and then you'll also have an opportunity in breakout groups to take a closer look at it and discuss those features in your groups. All right, so thank you for participating in that poll. Just to introduce myself, I'm Desiree Carver-Thomas. I'm a researcher and policy analyst at Learning Policy Institute, and I'll be joined by my colleague, Danny Espinoza, later in this presentation. Just some housekeeping. If you have any questions, we'll be taking those in the chat. My colleagues, Maria Heiler and Marjorie Wechsler, will be getting to as many of those as they can So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. All right, so we will get started. Just wanted to let you know who we are at Learning Policy Institute. We conduct, collect, and communicate independent, high-quality research. We work with policymakers, researchers, educators, and community groups and others to advance evidence-based policies that support empowering and equitable learning for each and every child. This is an overview of where we're headed today. We'll start with why racial equity, since we're talking about a racial equity tool. We will dig into the features of the tool, and then you'll have an opportunity to take a closer look at some excerpts of the tool. And then we'll spend some time planning for how you might take this back to your school communities, and then we'll wrap up. So why racial equity? So as more districts and schools begin the process of reopening for in-person learning, they're faced with difficult decisions about how best to meet the needs of children, families, and communities in the wake of a devastating pandemic that has hit communities of color especially hard. Of course, since its inception, our education system has offered deeply unequal opportunities for students of color, but the pandemic has really put that in stark relief. We've seen higher rates of infection, hospitalization, and death due to COVID-19 among communities of color. We've seen children experiencing trauma and isolation, children whose parents have lost their jobs, their homes, children who are food insecure. There's the isolation of being separated, and of course the big digital divide that many have experienced. We've seen decreased engagement and in fact a loss of engagement in large numbers in some districts. And then on top of the challenges of the pandemic, there's the additional burden of stereotype threat that many students experience that's further exacerbated by the hate speech and violence that have intensified in some cases and gained broader recognition in other cases. So with that in mind, it's all the more important that the way we bring children back into school settings isn't with a deficit lens or doesn't carry stigma, since that will further depress achievement, especially for students of color impacted by stereotype threat. So rather than stigmatizing children through old style tracking and remediation, it's really important that we bring them back in a way that's joyful and engaging with supports for acceleration. So we now have the opportunity to rethink how our school systems can deliver on the promise of a quality education for all children, and expanded learning programming is one place to start. So a little background on the DARE tool. It's a component of the Racial Equity Leadership Network, which is a project of the Southern Education Foundation in partnership with LPI and the National Equity Project. The Racial Equity Leadership Network develops the knowledge and practices of education leaders to advance racial equity. These are our cohort 3 fellows on the slide. They, along with cohorts 1 and 2, really helped us to refine the tool. This tool has been several years in the making at this point. So the DARE tool is based on a review of existing literature and instruments on educational equity. The practitioner experts that I mentioned in the previous slide reviewed the tool and influenced its design for usability. And the DARE tool was peer reviewed in its final form. So now I will hand it over to my colleague, Danny Espinoza, to describe the features of the tool.
Yes, thanks, Desiree. Yes, I just want to dig into the tool, and we'll actually put a link in chat to the tool so you can see it in kind of full detail as well, and kind of follow along if you'd like. But first, let's want to pull open, or here's the 7 domains of the DARE tool. I'll give you just a moment to kind of quickly read those sort of one-word titles for each of the sections. And I'm sure one of the things that jumps out at you is that they look familiar, right? This tool, these domains are not new areas of focus, but rather what the tool provides is a new way for leaders to see systems through a racial equity lens. And our intention is to support systems in continuous improvement So we recognize that you can't do everything in all these areas at one time, but we think it's important to see the whole, as that helps to be intentional about how to prioritize. And I also just want to call your attention to the fact that the tool or the tool itself is in the shape of a wheel, right? And that's intentional. It's meant to highlight that this is the nature of a system in which it works together. It has mutually supportive components. But however, we do usually start with a discussion of vision. That's because without a clear, ambitious vision for district-wide racial equity, it's hard for districts to collaboratively decide on a plan of action and to advance racial equity. Next, we talk about access to rich, deeper learning, culturally responsive curricula and practices, because that's what we want for all our students. It's the heart of the American educational experiment. And thus we focus on elements that are key to supporting opportunity, access, and achievement for students of color. And I know I probably don't have to tell this group, but just how important safe, healthy, and inclusive school environments are to the health, well-being, and learning of students. But in this domain, we focus on specific aspects of schooling that impact students of color, such as addressing physical and mental health needs, the fostering of positive youth development and development of authentic relationships, with an explicit focus on social emotional well-being, as well as a focus on supportive environment for all community members. And of course, attending to those different elements, it's impossible to do so without being really intentional in the allocation and distribution of financial, human, and material resources. So that's an additional domain. And in development of the tool, hearing about all these other elements, we know that for schools to be what we need them to be for students, it's really vital to bring in meaningful partners across community members to collaborate for the benefit of our students, but especially to have that sort of partnership when advancing racial equity. And next, undergirding all of this is the need for a robust system for gathering, communicating, and using data to drive progress towards racial equity. And when you get the chance, I do urge you to read that section carefully, as it calls for a critical look at data and how it's used, how it's discussed, and really interrogating the ways of whether it's being used, data is being used to productively advance racial equity, rather than kind of falling into that kind of sometimes too prevalent dynamic of data being used to shame and blame kids and communities. But last and certainly not least, the center of the framework is student success. And what I want to call your attention to here is the definition of student success and how it includes broad thinking about outcomes for the whole child. So it's not just academic knowledge, but social emotional skills as well. And on this slide is just a graphic which is detailing how the tool is set up for each domain. It's what we call the anatomy of the tool. So for each domain, first you'll see underneath the title a brief literature review that explains why the domain is important, gives a research base backing that up. But you'll also note that our language for each domain is asset-based and aspirational. And so we deliberately stayed away from starting with gaps and instead discuss why the domain is important for racial equity. And second is the blue section. And these are essential questions that you can ask yourselves and teams to guide thinking on that domain. And last, in orange, is a bulleted list of specific evidence that you can look for in your system to help answer the associated essential question. And we knew that the tool needed to be flexible and adaptable to local communities, so we included another option for you to fill in with the best, most widely available info for your context. But I'm going to pass it back to Desiree, who will help you practice using this tool to support the expanded learning planning that you have underway now.
Thank you, Danny. So we're going to think aloud together to demonstrate a process that you can take back to your teams for supporting racial equity in your expanded learning planning. And as Danny mentioned, you can't focus on all the domains at once. And because we know that many students are returning to school from an incredibly challenging year, we'll start by prioritizing the safe, healthy, and inclusive school environments domain, although you may choose something different with your teams. So this is an excerpt from the DARE tool. So we'll start by reviewing the essential questions. Those are the ones in blue, as Danny mentioned. And we'll ask ourselves, which essential questions feel most relevant when you think about planning expanded learning for your community in this moment. So I'll give you a moment to take a look through those if they're not too small for you. So for example, your district context might demand that you take a closer look at the first question, which is how does the district address students' physical and mental health needs? So you might consider, how would you answer this question about your district or school community? How do you think others on your team would answer it? What about your students and their families? And how would your community partners answer this question? And this is to get you thinking about what makes this really relevant to your context. So next, we'll review the look-fors. And we'll start by asking, which are showing up in your context. These are things that you're already doing or already paying close attention to. And then which require more attention. So for example, for this essential question, maybe your district already has a system for surveying students to determine their feelings of belonging or whether they have a relationship with a caring adult. But maybe you haven't yet provided professional development for educators to implement trauma-informed practices in and out of the classroom. And then what else might you look for to know that your programming is addressing students' physical and mental health needs? So for example, maybe you want to know the amount of time students will engage in physical activity or something else. So remember that there's the option to add other look-fors that are important in your context. So one example that I wanted to mention is the Children's Defense Fund Freedom School. So the CDF Freedom School model has 5 essential elements, one of which is nutrition, health, and mental health. And evaluations of that program show that it supports the positive character development of students, as well as achievement on standardized reading tests. So now you'll have time to take a closer look at this domain on your own and in small groups. And we'll try this using an online platform called Mural, which you may be familiar with. You'll have 15 minutes in your breakout groups to follow the instructions that you'll get linked in the chat. And that will include time to work through the Mural activity and also to discuss in your groups. So I'll start by showing you what that will look like. So I'm pulling up the Mural page now, and this is what you should see when you get to the link that will be in your instructions. So this is the same excerpt from the DARE tool for the Safe, Healthy, and Inclusive School Environments page. You'll be able to zoom in to really get a better look and read it closely. And you can zoom out in order to see what else is on the page. And you'll see that there are 4 activities around the perimeter of the page, 1, 2, 3, and then the last is on the bottom. There are a few ways for you to navigate. You can just kind of use your trackpad or mouse to get around, and you can zoom in and out to get a closer look. You can use this outline that's on the right side of your screen, and if you lose that, there's a button here at the top right to get that back. And then that will help you just kind of navigate from one prompt to the next. So I'll go back to the first question. It says to review the essential questions under ask. And again, those are the blue questions here. And place a star next to the essential questions that feel most relevant when you think about planning expanded learning for your community in this moment. So you can take a star, you can drag it and put it next to those essential questions that feel really relevant in your context. You can also just cut and paste if you are familiar with doing that with your keyboard shortcuts. If I want, I can make a copy of this and put that here. So you'll just, and then I'll move on to the second activity, which says to review the look-fors, and for the essential questions that you identified, place a check mark next to those look-fors that are already showing up in your context. These are things you're already doing, already paying close attention to. So again, I can take that check mark and I can take a closer look at the look-fors, and maybe I'm already doing this one. So I'll put that there. Be mindful of not covering up the text so that others can continue to read what's there. So then I'll move on to the third prompt, which tells me to place a heart next to those look fors that require greater attention in your context. Again, I can drag that over and place it, or I can cut and paste it wherever I want to put that. I can make a copy of it, so I can put another one somewhere else. And then finally, because we know that every context is different, you'll consider which look fors might be missing and type new look fors of your own and place those next to others. So again, I can take my Post-it, I can put it where I think it belongs, and then I can type a new look for that's for my context. So that's it. Again, you'll have 15 minutes to work through this in your groups. If any questions come up, Danny and I will be popping into the rooms, but please also lean on each other, those of the other folks that are in your groups. And you can also drop questions into the chat and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. All right, so we will see you back in 15 minutes for some sharing. These all seem relevant to some degree to most people. I also see a lot of check marks throughout, which tells me a lot of these things are happening, at least in some places, in some school communities, district communities. I noticed a cluster of hearts around absentee levels. So maybe that's something that a few different school communities are interested in paying greater attention to. And I'd like to hear from a couple groups, your thoughts on as you were working through this activity. So you can raise your hand or use the raise hand feature and we'll take a couple comments. So just one or two people who'd like to share. I might be missing some hands because I can't see everyone. And feel free to just chime in. You don't have to wait for me to call on you if I don't see your hand.
I'd be happy to kick us off. This is Amira, and I appreciated our group conversation and the questions that we lifted up, really valuing the tool in all the domains, and trying to really visualize how to implement it and where to start. So we were having some conversation about within our teams after we've gone through an assessment process, where to take that next first step or how to build consensus as a team on where to start. Is there a better place to start than somewhere else? As we, determine all the areas of opportunity and possibility. And then another question that came up was how to measure success. So those were a couple questions just to kick us off.
Thank you for sharing that. And one thing I'll just note is, this tool is not too prescriptive about what measurement looks like, because we recognize that there's just so much data being collected in every district, every school, and it may look different, and it can all be valuable. So it's really not about creating new things if there's already tools that you have in place that you can leverage. Any other folks want to share about your discussion?
I had shared in my group that using a tool like this will leverage and help when you're having difficult conversations or possibly uncomfortable conversation with district leaders that either are hesitant or resistant or just need some more knowledge in regards to what's taking place at their districts. So having a tool like this that has concrete information that you can pull and leverage your conversation is super helpful, so that it doesn't make it about what you're seeing, it makes it about what they are.
That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so we have time to look through one more of the domains. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Danny, to walk us through the next one.
Sure thing. Thanks, Desiree. So, I want to just call back to something Desiree was mentioning earlier, right? That it's important that opportunities for expanded learning provide fun, engaging, and rich learning, and rather than old style tracking and remediation, right? I think there's a lot of deficit language around learning loss that at least every educator I've interacted with has really tried to shift away from. And so kind of with that in mind, we wanted to have a little bit more time to discuss the deeper learning and culturally responsive curricula domain with you all today. So to kick that off, just as before, we'll start by reviewing the essential questions. And apologies, I think I noticed that it could be a little difficult for some to read them all. But if you bear with me, the idea here was just to interrogate or ask yourself which feels most relevant when you think about planning expanded learning for your community, and particularly in this moment. And so, for example, you might focus on the first essential question, which is, does every student have access to curricula and assessments that are rigorous, authentic, relevant, and well-rounded? From there, you would consider which look-fors are showing up in your expanded learning program, and which might require more attention. So, for example, will your program engage students in complex problem solving and self-directedness? Will it include culturally responsive curricula? Will every child engage in a well-rounded curriculum that includes physical activity, arts, and other fun, engaging activities? And will you create inclusive environments for all students by integrating them through heterogeneous groupings rather than tracking students in ways that could be stigmatizing? And then to think about what's missing from this list, right? Like, what might you look for to know that your programming is offering access to a rigorous, authentic, relevant, and well-rounded curriculum? So Desiree mentioned earlier the Children's Defense Fund Freedom School Summer Learning Program. And this is a curriculum that's rooted in the Mississippi Freedom Summers of 1964, and it centers around civic engagement and social action, and explores those topics through project-based learning. And so it's just one example of a curriculum that aligns with many of the look-fors of the deeper learning domain, but wanted to offer that up as an example for you all. And similar to before, wanted to give you, our audience here, a chance to dig deeper into this domain in particular, and we'll do so again in breakout groups for about the next 15 minutes, and then we'll have another opportunity to share out. So we'll paste in the chat a second set of instructions, and please do open up this new set of instructions that has the discussion questions will be the same as the ones you just interacted with, but it'll be a second mural board, of course, with this new domain. So hopefully maybe worked out some of the kinks in navigating the mural board and how to work that. And so we'll open up those breakout groups for you all again to engage in this conversation, and we'll bring you back in about 15 minutes.
Okay, it looks like we are coming back together. I'd like to take a look at all of the work that you all did. See a little bit of a focus on that last central question around does every student have access to the academic supports they need to learn and excel academically? And it looks like needing some greater focus on that across various look-fors there. And I'd like to hear from some of you on your discussion, thoughts that you had as you were thinking about this domain, or other thoughts that came up for you. So feel free to just chime in if you've got a thought that you'd like to share.
I'm happy to jump in. And I want to thank Amira and Megan for our conversation. I think we found this one to be a lot more difficult. It's deeper. It crosses more domains, at least maybe different use of the word domain, but more parts of my brain. And really had some good discussion about what does it really mean to be culturally responsive without doing harm, or culturally relevant without doing harm. But one of the things that was pointed out was that we didn't see things like social justice or civic engagement listed. And all of us, I think, were thinking that that was really important to include, and what might that look like, and what might those look-fors be?
That's a great point. Thank you for raising that. I think I heard that in another group as well. So that's definitely something where you should feel free to add that to your own, definitely some thinking for us as well. Anyone else care to share some of the thoughts from your conversation?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about where expanded learning programs and school districts, when and where they have these conversations about these topics. How does that happen? How can we see where we're in alignment, and where we can help each other out in this topic? And that kind of was a big part of our conversation, just in general. When do you make a meeting, or go to the school board, or how do you make these conversations happen when everybody is really busy during a time when you have all of your to-dos on your email list and all the things that you have to do? Where does that room come from? So I think that was one thing that we kind of talked about.
Thank you for raising that. That's such an important point. And I was in another conversation where one of the questions is, who is the team? Who's the team that makes these decisions? And I think it's a question that, at least with the fellows that we've used this with, it's a perennial question. Is the team the folks with the titles that indicate that they should be on the team, or is it the folks who are impacted by the what will be done, the students, the teachers, the families, the people doing the work, the people who will be planning the programming and the curriculum and all of that. So that's definitely some thinking that will be really important as you get into planning. Well, what does this actually look like? Taking this into your context. So that's actually a great segue for the next portion of our conversation, which is, how do you bring this back to your school community? So I'll go ahead and get into that. All right. So how to use this tool in your school community. So we'll end with some considerations for how you can bring this back to your school communities, and how it can inform your plans for expanded learning programming. So the first thing, lost my place. So the first thing is that this is really meant to be a used in collaboration with stakeholders, whoever that might be. So the staff who are planning expanded learning, the staff who are going to be providing expanded learning, as well as teachers, community partners, students, and families. And I think the last comment was important, but where's the time? And so, it's, I think, important to think about, how can expanded learning be an opportunity to break away from the status quo that we know has not always worked for our students, and to do things differently in a way that we can expect better outcomes. And so that's, obviously this is a challenging time for everyone and it's hard to prioritize everything, but that's just something to think about. Next is that this tool really isn't designed to be used as a checklist. It's not about doing every single thing on the list, but really it's designed to determine priorities and set goals. And then finally, it's important that once those goals are set, that you monitor outcomes, revisit the look fors to track progress and share progress over time, and then of course make adjustments as needed. So take a moment to think about, what are some ways that you might lead your team or a team to think through the essential questions that seem most relevant to your expanded learning planning? And how might your team identify the look fors that feel the most critical in this moment and plan accordingly? So we have a few suggestions here, and I'm sure you all have others. So something like a jigsaw where, if you have small groups that each take one domain and identify the most relevant essential questions and look fors, then you can discuss those as a whole team and plan your program features accordingly. You might think about spheres of influence depending on, maybe it's not that your district or school community is ready for everyone to jump in, but a few folks can think about, well, what can I do in my role and responsibility? And so, you might think about, well, which of these look fors, essential questions and look fors are relevant to the work that I'm responsible for? And then how can I make a plan to address those things and track and share outcomes? There's, World Cafe you might be familiar with. So using actual Post-its or something like Mural to bring people together to gather suggestions for which look fors seem most relevant for each domain, similar to what we did today, but you could do it for all 6. If your district does plan do study act cycles, PDSA cycles, once you've planned your program features, you might use a structure like this to track your progress and make adjustments as needed. And so think about, how can you leverage the systems and structures you already have in place to integrate this tool? So our last session will be, what are your next steps? Who is your team? What challenges do you anticipate? So there's a host of discussion questions we'd like you to take a look at. These will all be, the instructions will all be linked in the chat. Again, this is a different set of instructions that are specific to this breakout room. So please do click the new link in order to get the discussion questions for, what are your next steps? You'll have 15 minutes to discuss in your groups, and then we'll come back for a whole group share out. All right, so it looks like folks are coming back from the breakout rooms. So we want to just hear from a few groups. What did you discuss? What are your next steps? Maybe reflect on some of those discussion questions, if any really resonated that you are thinking about, have some thoughts about. that you'd like to share?
I just want to give a quick shout out to my group. They giving me so much, and I got like maybe 2 pages worth of notes that help me kind of internalize and understand what I've been feeling, what I've been going through. And so they gave me so much in this time. You know, count me, I keep using the word ally, but count me as an ally, and anybody else on this call that took the time to be here. I'll put my email in the chat if I could ever help out in any way or share an experience. I would love to listen to yours and share mine, but we have a lot of work to do. And so, you know, thank you, Desiree, for facilitating us. But yeah, my team gave me a ton of info, so thank you.
It's great to hear. That's great to hear. Any other folks want to jump in? What about just thinking about some of those discussion questions, any challenges that you anticipate, and what are you thinking about in terms of addressing those?
This is Renee, and I speaking from coming from an educational and medical healthcare lens. One thought that came as soon as we were wrapping up is, as leaders in the after school space, it is going to be very critical and mindful. As we all know, many of our students and families have lost loved ones this last year. But as we move in our planning for the fall, in the winter season of when it hits, mainly with flu, virus season, things of that nature, is being mindful and staffed ready with those moments that are going to come again with the families, the parents themselves, of mourning loss and things that as we go moving forward, it goes back to that social emotional wellness, not just the child, but also the family. So those are some things that are going to come up as we move forward in rebuilding.
Yeah, such an important point. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts come up in your groups?
I also want to express gratitude for the space, just for everything that happened here, and also to the group. And I think there was a lot of conversation around kind of building our own capacity first to have these conversations, and then talk about what's next and what are the next challenges, because we are going to encounter different levels of readiness amongst other places, within our own organization and externally who we partner with in this space. And there's always going to be a moment where it's like, okay, well, we're going to do this, this, and this, but not looking at that transformative, like the long game. So there's a lot of talk around, there's an opportunity, yes, but if we use older thought processes on okay, let's just operationalize it, we're not going to get to that transformative, lifelong, transformative work that we're trying to get done by using this tool.
Not to dominate, our group is still talking, but I wanted to add that, one of the biggest takeaways for me is this conversation about, just piggybacking on what Mark said, like this is a big culture shift. And that it's a way to contribute to shifting the narrative, shifting the way that we kind of assess baseline of what we're really offering, and to then engage in shifting the culture of the organization, not just the individual work, but that partnered with some institutionalized changes, operationalizing stuff, and then that kind of shifting mindsets and behavior to get the organization to move closer to what we espouse, right, in terms of what our values are around racial equity. So thank you.
I think one thing I'll offer is that, obviously the tool outlines a lot of things that you could do. And I think that in this moment, it feels like there's a lot that needs to be done. There certainly is a lot that needs to be done. I think starting somewhere is further ahead than we might have been before. So that's something I want to just put out there. Even if you look at just one additional thing that you weren't looking at before, that could be impactful. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? All right, well, I want to thank you all for your time and joining us here today. I'm going to share my screen one last time so that you can see our email addresses. Please feel free to get in touch. There was a question about whether slides and videos will be shared. And my understanding is that the app that you use, that all the materials will be posted in the next week or so. So please do look out for that. But you can always email if you'd like. If for some reason that doesn't work, please feel free to get in touch. It's been a pleasure being here with you all today. Thank you for everything you do for our students, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you.